Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here today to be able to talk to you about how you can plan your finances to ensure that you're feeling in control and secure about your financial futures. Now, as Fiona's already introduced me, just to recap, my name's Katie Bye. So I'm the head of Better with Money. And Better with Money is an independent provider of financial education. We provide webinars just like these to help bring money matters to life, look to sort of break down some of the jargon, but hopefully help you to reduce any money stress you may be experiencing, ease any financial anxiety, and help you to sort of feel more confident when it comes to managing your money. Now, just before we begin, a few points to note. So firstly, we provide education, not financial advice. So it's my role to provide you with just the tools and the knowledge for you to make your own informed decisions about your money. Also, it's important to note that Better with Money has no financial products to sell. So where I do reference different tools, organizations, resources, it's just because we genuinely believe they are useful tools for you to take advantage of, and not because we receive any sort of financial incentive for mentioning them. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what we're going to be covering for today's session. So we're going to start by thinking about sort of what the big moments in life actually are. We're then going to have a look at how you can budget and save for those milestones, making sure that you avoid the sort of common budgeting and saving pitfalls. We're then going to go through a money timeline and some of the other things that you might want to think about from a money perspective as you go through each decade of your life. And there will be time for questions at the end, so please do feel free to type those questions into the chat as we go, as Fiona has already mentioned. So let's get started. Now, as we travel through life, our financial priorities change and our relationship with money evolves too, because each decade of life usually carries with it sort of several big money moments. Now, at Better with Money, we often think of these as our financial life quakes. So it's those big moments that shake up our finances. They can disrupt the financial landscape around us. And I've just listed some of those big moments on the slide here. So we've got things like university. So a huge new chapter in anyone's life, which also brings with it a level of financial responsibility. We've got new job. So starting a new job will often sort of bring about changes to your finances, perhaps because you're moving to a higher or a lower salary, paid on a slightly different basis, or maybe you're receiving a new or different range of employee benefits from your new employer. Getting married. So it means you're tied to another person, both in law, but also financially. We've got an example of buying a house here. So often the biggest investment that we will ever make in our life, and often the largest asset and huge financial responsibility that comes through bills, especially if you have to then take out a mortgage. Starting a family. That has implications on both income, if we need to go on maternity or paternity leave or reduced working hours, and expenditure. So we see increased costs in many areas of spending, particularly childcare. And then finally, we've got retiring. So taking a step back from work, either completely or partially, and navigating the financial changes that come with that. Now, of course, there's lots of other big moments as well, like getting divorced or bereavement. And some of these things may be totally joyous, whilst others may be really difficult to navigate. Now, similarly, when some of them are unexpected, or others you may be able to plan for. But whatever these life quakes are, they often have financial implications and they require you to make financial decisions. And so where we can plan for these financial life quakes, it can be a really good idea to do so that we feel more in control, we feel confident that we're on track, but in turn, it reduces any financial stress and anxiety that may be associated with these milestones. So, with that in mind, let's now sort of think about your big moments because no two people are on exactly the same journey. Now, historically, perhaps people followed a more rigid path of education, marriage, children. Nowadays, different people are on their own unique journeys, and there's no right, there's no wrong way of ordering these things. So it's important to think about your own money moments, your own financial milestones, and consider how you plan in a way that's right for you. So it's really about taking some time to define your goals. What do you want to achieve and when? And then think about what money goals you're going to have. So generally we think about these and categorize them over the short, medium and long term. And short term goals are those within sort of the next 5 years, medium term goals 5 to 10 years away, long term goals are much further into the future, so a minimum of kind of 10 years plus. And it's that sort of bigger picture stuff which usually requires us to take a bit of a step back from the day to day. And it's really important to do this because if you don't know what you're working towards and what you're hoping to achieve, then it's very difficult to plan financially and budget for those things as well. So really worthwhile to put aside some time to think about this. And if you're in a relationship, you may want to have that conversation with your partner as well. So really establishing those joint goals and milestones. And one of the reasons it's so important to define your goals is because your timeline will dictate the best approach to saving or investing for them. Now, before we think about any particular goal, the first thing to remember is your emergency fund. And that's that kind of safety net, that cash buffer that covers any unforeseen or emergency expenditure. Now, that should contain at least 3 to 6 months worth of your essential outgoings in a cash, easy access account. So no risk being taken with that money. Now, once you've got your emergency fund in place, you can then start thinking about your other short-term financial goals. Now, cash is king in the short term because it means your money is secure, often protected under the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. It involves sort of little risk. You're able to keep track of exactly how much you have, and you can open a sort of savings account or a cash ISA, which may pay you some interest. But then when we move on to medium and longer term goals, it's with these goals that you may start to think about investing, which simply means putting your money into something other than cash. Because whilst cash is great for the short term, it isn't always the best strategy to keep cash for longer term goals, even where the cash is earning a reasonable interest return. And that's because over the longer term, cash doesn't tend to keep pace with inflation. So the purchasing power of your money decreases over time. So that's where investing comes in. In general, if you have time on your side, you have longer to ride out stock market volatility. So you may be able to take on more risk in the hope of getting a better return on that money than you would have gotten if you'd have left the money in cash. But really important to remember, with investing always comes risk. So you could get back less than what you've put in. But if you've weighed up those risks and you decide you want to invest, then pensions, ISAs, they can be a really tax efficient way of doing that. And like I said, particularly geared for the longer term as well. Now we're going to move on to thinking about some of the common budgeting mistakes because planning for future milestones requires you to know your budget. Now, I'm not going to go through exactly how to budget in today's session. We covered that in the Money Makeover session that we ran in January. So please take a look back at that recording that the ICE Benevolent Fund is still hosting for you if you want to learn more and certainly revisit any of the previous sessions that we've delivered. But instead, today, I'm going to focus on some of the common budgeting mistakes to help you to avoid them. Now, the first mistake is not having a budget in the first place. And Just because, as you need to have a sort of good idea of what you're working towards by setting those goals, you also need to know how much money you have available to be able to put towards them. And there's no point sort of saving hundreds of pounds a month towards a future milestone if you don't have enough to live on day to day. And similarly, if you have spare money that you can save towards goals, you don't want to be flittering that away on things you don't really need. So first things first, really important to complete your budget. Now, whilst you're doing your budget, important to not guess your expenditure, because the figures you come out with probably won't be an accurate representation. The best way to get the most accurate picture of your expenditure is to look back over your actual transactions, so via your bank statements, and then further back you go, the better. Now, whilst doing this, it's really important to remember those annual costs as well. So things like birthdays, car MOT, annual service charge. Also, any costs relating to debt that you have. So things like car finance, loan repayments. Your expenditure should cover everything. So that even includes the fun stuff. So be sure to kind of factor in things like meals out with friends, takeaways, money that you spend on clothes, Amazon deliveries, whatever it may be, because they should all be included. And another important point to avoid is not reviewing your budget periodically. None of the things we're talking about today are sort of once and done exercises. In reality, you might decide to change your plans, or you may be faced with unexpected life quakes, and therefore it is really important to adapt your budget accordingly and have that regular review in place. So we've covered budgeting, but I want to now have a look at saving to help you to sort of achieve your goals faster. And I'll start with the do's. So we always encourage people to pay yourself first. And quite simply, that means putting some of your salary on payday directly into your savings. So it's about proactively setting that money aside for your future goals and your future self, rather than sort of waiting to the end of the month, seeing what you have left over, and then putting money into savings at that point. So this step is all around sort of prioritizing your goals. And I'd also really encourage you to save regularly, as that can really help the whole process to feel more manageable. Every penny that you're able to save, no matter how small, is just a step closer towards you achieving your goal. So don't wait until you maybe get a windfall, like a bonus or some sort of inheritance. Instead, commit to saving little and often. And to help you with sort of both of these points, automate your savings by setting up a standing order from your current account directly into your savings vehicle on payday. It means that you're paying yourself first and you're saving regularly without even having to think about it. So it's one thing off your to-do list. And there's also many other tools that you can use to help saving easier. So things like roundup features, which many of the banks now, give you access to. So that will round up your expenditure to the nearest pound or £5 or £10, whatever you select, and then deposit that difference directly into your savings account. Now, particularly where roundup is only a couple of pence, you probably won't notice that you're saving, but roundups can add up really, really quickly. And there's some brilliant kind of case studies that are out there of where people have set that in place and then been really blown away by the end of the year what they've been able to achieve. And the final saving do is to sort of set yourself a goal or a challenge that will hopefully help motivate you to be disciplined with your savings. So, for example, a goal might be that you want to save £100 by X date. You could even write that on your calendar. You could set a reminder on your phone to hold yourself accountable. One of my favourite challenges is the 1p saving challenge, where you save 1p on day 1, you do 2p on day 2, you do 10p on day 10, etc. So if you did that for a whole year, the most you'd save in one day is £3.65 or £3.66 on a leap year. but you'd have built up a pot of nearly £670 by the end, probably without even really noticing. So there's some of the do's. So let's have a look at some of the don'ts. Well, firstly, if you don't save into your sort of existing accounts, so one place you absolutely don't want to save into is your current account. And there's a few reasons for this. Now, firstly, because you do your spending from your current account, things can start to become quite confusing. You'll probably find that you end up dipping in to those savings because it's difficult to keep track of what's saving and what's available for you to spend. Also, while some current accounts come with perks like cashback or cash bonuses for opening the account, most current accounts pay little to no interest. In contrast, some savings accounts are currently paying 4.5% to 5% in interest. So you would be missing out on free money. Now, the next point is sort of, please don't worry if you're only saving a little bit. The most important thing is that you are saving anything, because every little bit adds up. You know, the whole saying, you know, look after the pennies, the pounds look after themselves. That's very true. And, you know, even saving a little really helps you to build some great healthy habits. And finally, don't align your saving strategy to your, well, sorry, don't forget to save, you know, your saving strategy to align it to your financial goals, because we spoke earlier in slides, it is really important to keep your emergency fund and your short-term savings in cash, but you may then want to think about investing for the medium and longer term goals to make sure that you're keeping pace with inflation, remembering, of course, that investments can carry some risk along the way. So it's that diversification, not having all our eggs in one basket, that's really, really important. So we've looked at how you can save for those major milestones, but now I want to sort of go through a money timeline to just give you an idea of some of the other financial areas you may want to think about as you move through the decades of your life. Now, before we start, I just want to acknowledge there is no one size that fits all here. Everybody will be different. So whilst these are perhaps the common themes that certainly I've come across, please don't worry if things resonate with you at different stages. They're really just to give you some ideas, some food for thought, to think about if you haven't already. So our 20s, this is usually the point at which you start formal employment, often the first time you're earning money for yourself. Initially, money's often hard to socialize. It is all about kind of being able to maybe go out to eat out with friends, long weekends away, you know, nights out, and that consumes most of the limited income we have. When it comes to things like saving, buying insurance, typically that's still relegated sort of to parents as their responsibility. A major hazard at this early stage is that we may overextend ourselves to keep up with our peers, even if we can't afford it. And at the same time, we often don't think of issues like buying a house or retiring. You know, surely we're too young to be thinking about that. And it is true that it may feel like a stretch as well to look that far ahead, but it can be really useful to start thinking about small steps that can be taken to learn about managing money responsibly, because there will come a point when money is not just about having a good time. So first and foremost, you know, start that savings habit, build that emergency fund, complete that budget planner, and keep an eye on your expenditure. Another sort of sensible money move is to start using credit sensibly, only borrowing money you can afford. And also borrowing money sensibly can really help you to build a credit score. But borrowing money for something you can't afford and you don't really need can be problematic debt. So just take care on that one. When we move into sort of the 30s decade, you may start to get more serious about money. You may sort of acknowledge that you've established yourself in a career. You started living perhaps with a partner, starting a family, and your financial goals and priorities are likely to shift as you face new responsibilities and challenges and begin to settle down. Now, these major life changes may cause you to feel worried, and the hazard of this sort of decade, is that sort of that anxiety piece that can start to kick in. So the key here is not to panic and not make rash decisions. Rather, focus on how you can put yourself in a stronger, financial position by increasing your savings if you can. So aim to save sort of 20% of your income towards those money goals. If you plan to buy a home, for example, consider increasing your savings towards that deposit. Making the most of benefits that you have access to through your employer. So are there benefits that you're not currently taking advantage of? And consider the use of those benefits, and sort of see them as more broadly than your salary, as well. So how can they financially protect you? And talking of protection, it's then protecting your assets as well. So as you start to accumulate wealth, you need to protect it. So consider getting things like life insurance in place, disability and critical illness insurance, and other types of insurance that help safeguard your financial position, income, and your future, and also your family members, as well, if that's applicable, at that point. Moving on to our kind of 40s and 50s, the hazard here is the lack of time, because you may be at the point where you're not only nearing the peak of your career, but you also may have caring responsibilities, whether that's for your children, aging parents, or perhaps you identify as being in the sandwich generation, which is certainly where I am right now, where you're looking after both. So you've still got sort of young children that are heavily dependent on you, but actually, you've got aging parents as well that comes with some caring responsibility. So it's really important to remember to set aside time for your financial priorities. And that includes things like revisiting that budget at all times, adapting it to account for new or different financial priorities, increasing your savings. So that may mean focusing on paying off debt as quickly as possible. And then that helps you to then save money in the long run and free up funds that can then go towards other financial goals or commitments. You should also consider your longer term plan as well. So you may want to start thinking about sort of longer term care, whether there's any insurance you could buy to protect you, but also you may want to start thinking about your estate planning. So considering things like your will, how you would want your estate to be distributed, and getting your will done will ensure that your money and property go to the people that you want it to go to. When we then move into our 50s, it's at that point you want to start thinking about maybe taking a step back from work soon. And the hazard at this age can really be where retirement planning hasn't been considered yet. So perhaps you've always thought that your house would be your retirement fund, or you may have never really thought about it at all and now feel it's too late. But regardless of whether you should have started earlier, I can assure you it isn't too late. So you should sort of make sure that retirement planning is a top priority. It's important to assess your retirement needs. Think about, how much you've saved and is that enough to sustain your lifetime lifestyle in retirement, but also knowing things like what your state pension might be looking like, and also considering consulting with a financial advisor to start developing a plan to maximize your retirement savings. If you haven't done so already, really important at this point, start thinking about estate planning. So if you already have, it's about reevaluating that current plan to make sure it still meets your needs. And that includes longer term care as well. I've put a link on the slide to the Money Helper Midlife MOT. So that's a tool that helps you to assess your current situation, but also to plan for the future. So it will generate a personalized report telling you what to prioritize and how to improve your financial well-being from a kind of midlife perspective through to retirement. And then finally, we sort of move into the final decade of our money timeline, which is your 60s, where your concern may be then directed towards children or grandchildren. But actually, the most important person to think about is yourself. So this time is all about doing all those things you've always wanted to do while you're still able to, and your finances play a huge part in that. So it's about making sure your plans for retirement and the income are there. The other impacts there could be once you stop working, also revisiting long-term care plans, but also thinking about your legacy. And so, does your will kind of include everyone you want it to? Are there charitable causes you'd like to support? And also important to adjust your will as your family dynamics, lifestyle changes take place, and your assets are being properly reevaluated at all times and passed on appropriately. Now, I'm going to just finish off with a quick summary that I've just put up here. So I've given you sort of some of the 5 top tips really to help you for the best level of financial empowerment. The aim being here for you to be able to take a pen and put a tick through them as well. But that brings us to the end of today's session. But before we move to questions, I just wanted to remind you of the fantastic help and support that you have access to through the IC Benevolent Fund and the IMechE Support Network. But I'm going to now pass back to Fiona for any questions that we may have had.
Brilliant. Yes, thank you, Katie. A couple of questions. For stocks and shares ISAs, I've read it's better to drip feed money into the account rather than put one large deposit in. Is that true?
Yeah, in reality, there's kind of no right or wrong, but by sort of drip feeding money into investments, it helps spread the risk. And that's because really by drip feeding money in, you're investing at different points. So you'll be buying in to that particular investment at different prices, sometimes high, sometimes low. But through that sort of pound cost averaging, you're then less exposed to market fluctuations compared to if you just kind of invested a big lump sum and then the market was to drop.
Okay, super. Thank you. Another one we've had is I'm considering changing where my savings are due to low interest rates. If I move to another account every couple of years, is that going to look bad on my credit rating?
So opening a new current account, a bank may run a credit check, which can impact your credit rating. So you might not want to switch current accounts very regularly, because there may not be time for your credit rating to sort of recover between those switches, particularly if you're looking to apply for a loan or a mortgage. Savings accounts don't always result in a hard credit check. So it might just be a soft credit check to just verify your identity, and soft credit checks certainly don't impact your score. But if you're unsure, check kind of, what the impact is going to be on your score before you apply. But it's normally more relevant to current accounts. And yes, you do need to be mindful because you'll probably be aware on any application for credit, they'll always ask you what's the length of time you've been with that bank. And there's a reason they're asking for that, because they're looking for financial stability. And what they don't like to see is every couple of years you're sort of chopping and changing to a new bank, because it doesn't enable them to have that kind of proof of sort of how you manage that account. So yeah, just be mindful if it's a current account you're moving. Savings account, typically soft checks for identity and won't impact your score.
Just following on from that one, would opening children's bank accounts or savings accounts affect your credit score as well, or is that held
No.
separately?
Yeah, no, it's held separately. Typically, they're in the child's name, but the
Hmm.
parent or legal guardian is purely acting as a trustee over that account.
Brilliant. One final question. Would you say putting a quarter of your savings into stocks and shares ISA at 19 is a good or a bad idea?
I think it's fair to say the general rule of thumb with investments, the younger and the earlier you can get in them, the better, because stock market based investments are for the long term. So therefore, the longer you have to ride out any fluctuation that will happen. Again, I don't think it's necessarily about a set percentage, because it is about working in line with that budget of what's affordable, and also making sure you've got sufficient emergency funds. That always is number one as a goal, to have your buffer. And only at that point, when you're confident that your emergency fund and your short-term savings are in place, do you then look at your medium and longer term. And then, yes, absolutely, that's when stocks and shares become applicable. But I'd be very nervous if anybody wanted to do stocks and shares if they didn't have their emergency fund in place first, because it is subjected to risk at the end of the day.